Hello everyone. I am Aslihan SAYILAN from Lyon, and my work to present today is in situ small-scale tribological analysis of steel-steel contact by evaluating the image with an image analysis technique. So today I'm going to introduce the objective of my project, then I will explain how we are doing the in situ small-scale tribological characterization, how we are analyzing the effect of environment onto the tribological behavior of materials, and how we are doing the image analysis. Then I will conclude it. So at the beginning, the objective of my project is to do the surface analysis and tribological characterization of engineering materials, thin films, and coatings under various physical-chemical conditions, and we would like to analyze the formation of particles, the third bodies, and chemically evaluate the wear track. For this, we need to monitor the results, the data that we recorded, and we wanted to do the analysis in small scale, so we used the microscope, and we worked in operandi conditions, which our system allows us to do that. So for that, we have a microtribometer. It is a laboratory-made device designed and developed by two laboratories of Lyon, Matthäus and LaMCoS, and it is operable under different environmental conditions, and it's a ball-on disc reciprocating system. Here you are seeing that it is working into under an optical microscope, but it is also implementable into scanning electron microscope. And we are aiming to correlate the morphology of the wear track that we obtain with the friction coefficient to do the surface texture analysis. So while doing our in situ small-scale characterization, as I said, we are able to implement the microtribometer into scanning electron microscope. Here it's working into SEM chamber. And for this, we are using SEM Quattro, which is a microscope allows us to operate it under high vacuum, low vacuum, or different environmental conditions in ESEM mode, environmental mode. So we are able to modify the gas nature inside the chamber, or the temperature, or the relative humidity of the chamber. In our tests, we focused on the humidity. We modified the humidity inside the chamber, and we had a steel-steel contact along a 2 millimeter of wear track. We applied 100 cycles, and we used a steel ball as the counterface. So we modified the humidity of the chamber starting from the high vacuum to low vacuum, and different relative humidities with the 35, 50, and 85%, just by changing the atmospheric pressure of the chamber and keeping the temperature as constant. And we are able to evaluate the wear track after every single cycle, and to evaluate the morphology of the wear track in 3 different zones. Well, we picked 3 different zones from the beginning point of the contact, center, and the finishing point of the contact. And we are able to do the friction force or friction coefficient analysis for cycle by cycle. In our case, we had applied cycles by sets, like 10 cycles for one set, and we evaluated our wear track after every 10 cycles. And here you are seeing the images from the central zone of the wear track with different magnifications. In order to analyze the morphology, by using these images, we try to do the surface texture analysis. For these 3 different zones that we analyzed, we recorded the coordinates along a 2 millimeter of wear track, starting point, the region of interest A, center as B, and the finishing point of the contact C. We have seen that the surface texture of the wear track is changing. Here, for example, for the region C, at the end of the wear track, we have more compact and cohesive deformations, while we have a more textured surface with some plastic deformation for center, or some powdery structure for the starting point of the wear track. So we thought that it could be nice to correlate the texture and the friction coefficient with each other. And as I said, we also analyzed the behavior of the wear track under different environments. And we have seen that the humidity has a kind of effect on friction coefficient. For high vacuum and low vacuum tests, we had a relatively higher friction coefficient by comparison to the humid mode tests. And also for the 50% of relative humidity, which was quite interesting for us, the friction coefficient was the lowest. So we analyzed the images in order to understand better if there is a correlation. And we have seen that the friction coefficient confirmed with the, for example, for the 50% of relative humidity test, it confirmed with a smoother texture of the wear track. Also for 85% of relative humidity, we had a relatively smoother texture, but not as smooth as the 50% test. For the higher tests, we had a more textured surfaces, and these images are taken from the central zone of the wear track. By considering that, we thought that we can combine this with the image analysis technique. The image analysis algorithm was written by my colleague Alize Bouchon, and she's going to present more in detail on Thursday on the workshop. But there are actually several parameters that we can correlate the surface texture and the friction coefficient. There are 10 different parameters like inertia, entropy, surface homogeneity, energy, and in our case, we chose entropy. And we have seen that the smoother texture has a smaller entropy, and with more crushed surfaces, we are obtaining a higher entropy, and it is actually helping us to correlate correlate it with the friction coefficient. And when we analyze the wear track along the same wear track after same number of cycles, as I showed before, that the surface texture was changing from region to region. And when we check the entropy values, we have seen that the values could be also differ from region to region for entropy. We also try to understand the effect of environment if it has a relation with the entropy. We have seen that, for example, for low vacuum tests, we have higher, relatively higher entropy by comparison to the humid mode tests. So as I said before, that the friction coefficient for low vacuum was higher by comparison to the humid mode tests, but it was not so easy to correlate it with instantaneous friction coefficient at a specific time at a specific place. So actually we are trying to improve this algorithm and trying to understand it more in detail, because there could be some other parameters which are affecting, like the gas pressure that we used inside the chamber, or the brightness, contrast, and the bias that we modified when we are changing the pressure. So we are aiming to enhance it a bit more, and also maybe we could correlate it with the other parameters like the local homogeneity or the energy, in addition to entropy. So to conclude, we verified that our microtribometer is operable under different environmental conditions into SEM chamber, and we had done the tests with steel-steel contact. We have seen different kind of deformations, different kind of failures along the wear track, but we have seen a higher friction coefficient with high vacuum and low vacuum test by comparison to low humid mode tests. So, and there is the case of curiosity for the smoother texture of the 50% of relative humidity test with the lowest friction coefficient. But with the texture analysis, we had seen that there could be a correlation between friction coefficient and surface texture by considering entropy, but we are aiming to do some further analysis in this case. And you are all invited to my colleague's presentation on Thursday to know more in detail about that. And thank you for your attention, and I would be glad with your questions.